my own computer, but welcome and thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about something that's really quite near and dear to my heart, and that is teaching comprehension. And we all know that for decades we've been talking about reading comprehension and teaching strategies, and yet I still feel that there are some miscomprehensions out there about truly teaching reading comprehension. So I thought we would take a look at three pretty big questions. First of all, what do we already know about teaching reading comprehension? What is strategy instruction? And then lastly, how does strategy instruction, it should be how does strategy instruction, forgive me, connect to the Common Core state standards? And while I know there are many states now that are moving away from using the Common Core state standards, when you take a look at your own state standards, the content, the end of year expectations are pretty consistent with Common Core state standards. So I wanted to address that at the end. So first of all, what do we know? We know what successful readers do in using strategies. They use them to think about text. It's not that these are used blindly or as a skill automatically. They are really used thoughtfully to make sense out of text. Good readers also use strategies to get at the deeper meaning of text. I think there's some misconception sometimes about what a strategy, the use of strategy is for the reader. And it certainly is to get at the meaning of the text. When you get the reader's intent, making inferences, if you're using predicting, if you're making connections, if you're visualizing, you're still using inferencing and getting at the deeper meaning of text. And something else that strategies are critical for, and that good readers do all the time, is they use their knowledge to learn from text. I have no question that reading for pleasure, reading because you love reading, is wonderful, and we all do that. But in this day and age, the 21st century, what we do need to do is to help our students truly learn from text itself and to take that knowledge and apply it to new learnings as they make connections and add to their already existing body of knowledge. I love this cartoon because it really does get at what instruction shouldn't be. Now that you've read the story about Ellie the hippo, it's time for the questions. Okay, why is Ellie living in a cage at the zoo? Why can't she live in a big pond or even a river? Don't you think if she had more room to move around, she wouldn't be quite so chubby? Not your questions, Ruthie, the workbook's questions. Well, why do they get to ask all the questions? And the reality is that today, whether you are using strategy instruction or looking at Common Core, the teacher still is in control and asking all the questions. And the reality is that asking question after question is not instruction. It's testing. And believe me, there is a time and a place for testing, but it is not when we teach comprehension. So what is strategy instruction? Students really need to learn what the strategy is, why it's important, and how, when, and where to apply it. This is something that doesn't happen overnight, and it's something that we really do need to teach our students. And how do we teach reading comprehension? Well, it's very much the way we teach all kinds of other things. We explain to students why strategies make a difference, and then when and how to apply that strategy. Let students in on why we summarize. Let students in on why we make a prediction. We make a prediction not because the teacher asks us to make a prediction. We make a prediction not because the text or the curriculum says we need to teach making predictions. Solid readers make predictions all the time because it's motivational and it helps to keep them engaged in the text and moving on. We do it very subconsciously, but we do it. And the reality is that we need to let all of our students in on this. All right, so we've explained to our students what a prediction is and why we do it. Not because I say so, because there are real motivational reasons. But we also then need to model how to do it. And we should be modeling or demonstrating the strategy, not asking questions. Excuse me. All too often, when I've been in classrooms and I hear teachers doing strategy instruction, their idea of strategy instruction is to say, okay, who can make a prediction now? Who can make a connection? What kind of summary can we make? And this is, excuse me, and while these are valid questions, it's really not modeling or demonstrating the strategy. Then we need to provide opportunities for students to apply their new knowledge. And that application needs to be done, or that initial guided practice needs to be done in an environment where students can try the strategies, get feedback as they use the strategies, and then make adjustments as appropriate when they are reading. And lastly, which is the goal of reading instruction for all of us, is that students need to apply this reading to whatever they are reading. Now, I think there's a reality out here. When we are reading things for pleasure and it's pretty light reading and there's nothing really challenging about it, we often don't use strategies. But as we are reading more complex text, literature, as we are reading more complex text, informational pieces, then what we need to do is use these strategies to make sense of the text. And we can teach them during language arts, we can teach them during reading, but we really need to help our students transfer this ability to use strategies to all the reading that they do throughout the day. And modeling is absolutely key to this whole process. Modeling explains what a proficient reader does as he or she is reading to engage with the text, to solve problems, and to think about the text and to make sense of it. It's not a question. Modeling is going through that actual process of opening up one's mind to how one solves problems and engages in reading. Modeling should be using think alouds that contain the name of the strategy. What are we going to be doing here? Which strategy are we going to be using? We're going to be predicting. Why are we going to use it? Not because it's a guess. The fact is, we use a strategy like predicting when clues have been given by the author, and we can use our own background knowledge to make the prediction. And then that model, or that think aloud, should include the actual thinking. So I've included here a little model of a think aloud. They don't have to be complicated. They don't have to sound stilted, but this is from Frog and Toad, and it can go something like this. Boy, Toad keeps trying all kinds of things to make his garden grow. And if you know the story, Frog and Toad, you know, he sings to it, he waters it, he looks at it, he just tries everything to make his garden grow. So the author has given us, Arnold Lobel has given us these clues. He's covered the seeds, he's watered them, he sang, and his garden still hasn't grown. So now I'm going to make a prediction. I predict that he's going to try something new. I included the name of the strategy, why it's being used, and what it looks like. It doesn't have to sound stilted. We can make it very much our own. Think Aloud modeling opens a window into the mind so students can learn how to use these strategies effectively and efficiently on their own. Again, as I noted earlier, this does take time. Thinking aloud is a technique, and it's one where we verbalize what we are thinking about the text. The intent behind it is to help students develop their own ability to use these strategies so they can monitor their own understanding. Think Alouds deal with ideas as they are encountered in text. You don't pre-teach strategies. Sometimes what happens is, and I think many of you have experienced this kind of thing, where we teach something in isolation, and then when we go to use it, it just doesn't seem to work out quite the same way. Using these strategies and modeling of them, explaining of them, modeling them, and applying them in context is absolutely critical. And these models make thinking visible as we can make thinking, and provide examples for students. What our students need to realize is that these are not absolutes, that I may make one prediction, but they may interpret and make inferences based on their own experience, their background knowledge, and the ideas from the author. They may make a different prediction. So it's not a good or bad prediction. It is a prediction that we're going to read more about to see how it is borne out. Here's another prediction, and it comes from Where the Wild Things Are. And we all know this story, so we're familiar with what has gone on. And this comes from some research that was done back in 1992, but interestingly, the research is still consistent about how to think aloud. That night, Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. Boy, I can really see what Max is up to here. He's in his monster suit, and he's chasing after his dog with a fork in his hand, and I think he's really beginning to act a little wacky. I wonder what made Max act like that. Well, you know, maybe he's getting a little bored and wanted to go on to an adventure, I think that's my prediction. But I hope as I was doing this, you were also realizing that I'm making some connections here too. Because when I get bored, when my children get bored, they tend to do things that sort of stir the pot a bit if they want to, you know, when they get a little bit bored. So it's also making a connection here, and sometimes it's hard to separate out one from the other, but that's perfectly okay. A prediction for me may be a connection for someone else. But one of the things we need to do when we talk about scaffolding all the time is we need to scaffold this strategy instruction, the explanation, the modeling with think alouds, the practice, and the independent application by providing additional explanations and modeling as needed. And then reducing our control by providing feedback and instruction as students become more and more independent. The goal of strategy instruction, and I'd like to say the goal of any instruction, should be to build student independence. We as teachers need to let go of control of knowledge and information so our students take control of it and can truly apply it in independent learning. I just love this cartoon because, one, I like cats, but I think it also is something that we need to think about as educators. Never, ever think outside the box. Well, you know, we really do need to begin to think outside the box in terms of our instruction with our students if we intend to make them independent, self-sufficient learners. Reading instruction really does need to focus on teaching students how to process text, to think about the text, to make inferences from the text, and to learn from it. And there needs to be that shift, that moving outside of the box to teaching the why, the how, and the when to use strategies to, one, understand literature at its deepest levels, and two, to build knowledge when we're reading informational text. We know that engaged readers use strategies to make sense of text and to integrate information, to connect it up to that schema that already exists, and then to communicate their reactions to literature and the new learnings that they've developed. So cognitive strategies, the strategies that I'm going to mention, are procedures that help students focus on higher order tasks. And this is just a schema that shows this move from teacher control down here, where we are doing most of the modeling, where we are doing the explanation, to students taking increased control of use of strategies, of the reading process itself. Scaffolding, as I noted earlier, is absolutely critical. Contractors use scaffolding all the time to support a building as it is under construction. But what happens once the building is completed? What happens when the outside is done and they're just working on the inside? They take the scaffolding down. They no longer need it to support the structure. And I think, again, as we think outside the box, we need to start really removing the scaffolding. We need to have it initially there to support students, but we need to know when to withdraw it so students can then begin to demonstrate understanding. Over and over again, we see in classrooms, and you may be familiar with it yourself, that the scaffolding just goes on and on and on. But the reality is the scaffolding has to be taken away if we ever expect our students to use the learning that we are providing them, that we are building, the comprehension tools, if we want them to use it themselves. Scaffolds are temporary devices and procedures used to support students as they learn strategies. So early on, when we're teaching strategies, we're going to explain the strategy more than once. We're going to model it multiple times. But gradually, we need to turn responsibility over to students. And sometimes that's interpreted as all of a sudden just saying, okay, do it on your own. But the fact is that we can do that scaffolding in a way that provides maximum support until students really can stand on their own. Let's go back to that prediction that we were talking about, whether it's Max or Toad and Frog, it doesn't matter. Let's think about it for a second. In the beginning, I read a prediction for Frog and Toad and what I thought Toad would do next to make his garden grow. And I went through detail. This was my thinking. This is what the author has said. But I know that he needs to do some other things, so I predict he's going to try something new. Toad's going to try something new. Well, that's pretty detailed. But I could have said, if I'm scaffolding, if the students are ready for it, this is a good place to stop and make a prediction. The author has given us a lot of clues. Let's go back and reread, something we often call close reading. Go back and reread and find the clues. Let's find all the clues the author has given us that will enable us to make a prediction. So now the students are taking responsibility for going into the text, finding the information, and making the prediction. That's what scaffolding should be, not just saying, okay, now it's your turn to make a prediction. Who can do it? And ultimately, those scaffolds need to disappear as students apply strategies and their own thinking to reading. Now, when I say they need to disappear, that doesn't mean that as we get into reading progressively more complex text, more demanding text, that we don't have to go back, that we may not have to drop back and help our students apply the strategies that will allow them to get deeper into text and to use the information from the text to make predictions, to make connections, to visualize, and so on. So these are some of the things that we absolutely can do to help our students scaffold learning for them and then take it away as they grow. Teachers need to model the strategies. They need to build the support for students and support the students, but gradually turn that responsibility over to the students. And there are student responsibilities for learning too. They need to begin to think aloud. We should drop the thinking aloud and let the students do it. Let the students say, you know, I've come to a word and I have no idea what it means. But maybe if I take a look at it and I see the different parts, the different structural elements to it, I can figure out the meaning. Or this is a good place to visualize something and have them, the students, explain why they are using the strategy. This helps students internalize the learning. But you know, it does something else too. It helps them collaboratively in the classroom work with other students to share the kind of thinking that they should all be using. And they need to be using those strategies independently. They need to be using them intentionally as they are needed. You know, there is no recipe. There is no recipe at all for when to use strategies. The only thing that drives strategy use is when the text doesn't make sense and we want to start figuring out the deeper meaning of the text itself. There is no absolute here. And what is a difficult word for one person may not be a difficult word for another. So it doesn't have to be clarified if the meaning is already known. And this is one of the things that we often don't think about, the fact that strategies need to be used intentionally by our students as they are needed, which means we as teachers need to be cognitively active every step of the way, recognizing that one student could make a connection and another could ask a question about exactly the same piece of text. And I will go back to this all the time, our students need to use this knowledge about reading throughout the day. You know, when we talk about scaffolding, we need to read the text ahead of time. We need to know where there are difficult pieces so we can anticipate possible student errors, possible student misconceptions, possible places where students really are going to need more or think alouds from us, more detailed think alouds from us to help them. We need to provide guided practice. And again, that means we need to be cognitively active all the time. There is no person, there is no program out there that can tell you when a student is going to need support. This is why there will always, always be a need for teachers. We need to provide feedback. We need to let our students know, that was a great, great think aloud. You told us the details in the story that are allowing you to make a prediction. That was a great think aloud. You told us the elements in the story that allowed you to visualize, but then you made inferences based upon your own experiences about what that meadow would look like. So we need to be specific in our feedback, and the feedback needs to be there not just when students don't get it, but when they do get it as well. We need to monitor student progress. And that means that as students are reading and as they're sharing their thinking aloud, we need to be aware of which students really have a handle on how, when, and why to use strategies, and which students are going to need additional support from us. And then lastly, we need to know when enough is enough from us as teachers. We need to know when to give it up. Strategy instruction at the beginning of the year should be, let me rephrase this. Strategy instruction at the end of the year should look dramatically different than at the beginning of the year. I'm going to see if I can flip back to this schema here. At the beginning of the year, when you're first teaching strategies, you have maximum control. By the end of the year, students should be doing the thinking aloud. Students should be solving the problems. Students should be sharing their knowledge about the text that they are reading. So let's take a look at some of the strategies. And these are familiar strategies. And I'm talking about these I'm spending less time on these because I know everyone knows the strategies. The issue is, how do we teach these strategies? And before we read, we want students to activate their own prior knowledge. We want them to set the purposes for reading. Good readers do that all the time. How many times when you were in graduate school did you go to the library, you picked up a book and you said, okay, my reason for taking this book out is I need to find information about X. You didn't read the whole book every time. And I think our students need to start realizing, particularly in content area reading, that they will have different purposes for reading. It can be for pleasure, it can be for learning, it can be for writing a paper. There are all kinds of different reasons for reading, and the student and the reader needs to set the purpose for him or herself. And as the students are reading, they need to make connections. They need to make predictions, and you will note that I am saying they need to confirm or revise those predictions. All too often, I will hear in a classroom someone say, that was the wrong prediction. You know, there are no right or wrong predictions. There are predictions that are, in fact, confirmed, and if they aren't confirmed, could we go back and take a look at why? Did we miss some clues? Did we make an incorrect inference? When you talk about teachable moments, this is a teachable moment. So let's take advantage of those. We want to visualize, and visualizing is not, and I'm going to underscore this, not just repeating exactly what the words of the authors were, or the author was. The words of the author were, What we want to do is have students think about the words of the author, yes, but then make inferences based on their own experiences. You know, when you read about a meadow and the author says, well, the grass was green and there were lovely yellow flowers growing there and there were butterflies among the flowers, and it was just very, very idyllic. Well, you know, all too often the students will visualize and say, and they close their eyes when they do this, which I love, and they'll say, okay, I can see the butterfly, I can see the flowers, and I can see the green grass. But that's not what visualizing is. Visualizing is thinking about those words and then making inferences. You know, I can see this place covered with flowers, and I've been to meadows, and I know that they can be very quiet, and on the outskirts of those meadows, there are probably trees, and I can see that in my mind's eye. So we really want to encourage our students to go beyond the words in the text itself. Here are the words, what inferences can we make, and how can we connect it to our own personal experience? We want the students to ask questions, not us, but the students. We want them to ask questions about what they're reading, and then at the end, to take a look at the questions and see if they have come up with the answers, And if they haven't, is it the quality of the question? Maybe we should have asked a different question. Maybe you're not going to find the answer to the question because it's a piece of fiction and we don't get all the answers all the time. Maybe if it's an informational piece, we need to go and we need to do more research. We need to come back to those questions. Don't drop them. Take advantage of them, again, as another learning opportunity. We want our students to summarize, and this gets really important in informational text, so we can keep making connections and building our understanding as we're reading. But realize a summary is not about detail after detail. It's about the big idea of what we just read. And all too often, I will hear a student come up with a great summary, really right on, spot on. And then the next thing I hear is, well, can anyone tell us more and more and more? And all of a sudden we have a retelling. Get the big ideas out there, because that's what a summary that good readers do all the time, and then they can continue to hang new information on that big idea. Clarifying is something that I mentioned earlier. When we come to words that we're not familiar with, we need to clarify them. And I don't mean words that we can't read, but words that we don't know the meaning of. Sometimes context helps, sometimes a dictionary helps, but you know what? Sometimes asking someone is equally as valid. Not a bad idea, because we all do it all the time. We also want students to clarify ideas. It's not just at the word level, but really at the concept level. When you get through reading a difficult concept, see if students need to stop and clarify. See if they can summarize as a way of clarifying. It's a really important and valuable tool as long as we move beyond the word level. And then lastly, to adjust our reading rate. And this is something that we as good readers do all the time. Think you're reading a novel, about yourself reading a novel and how you respond and what you do. And, you know, if it's a pretty easy piece, you just keep reading pretty quickly and there's no big deal. And then you get to think about in a graduate class and you're reading that section on the reading research and the discussion of all the statistics, you slow down. There's nothing wrong with slowing down. And all of these strategies, when used by the reader, help them monitor understanding. We want our students to be engaged in reading before, during, and after. So before reading, they're going to be activating prior knowledge. They're going to be setting purposes, asking questions, building background, using strategies that engage them in thinking before reading. Then during reading, we want them to use all of the strategies I just mentioned in order to construct meaning and monitor understanding. And then those very same strategies can be used afterwards to process ideas and apply new knowledge and to share with one another the new understandings about the literature or about the informational piece they have read. The process of comprehension is interactive and strategic. Readers make decisions by selecting strategies that fit the kind of text they are reading and their purpose for reading. Take a minute, for those of you who have your screen up, and I'll check it, time it, about a minute, and just read this little passage. It is from, this passage is from Ann Tyler, and it's about Morgan's daughter, and she is planning a wedding. So take a look at this, and just get a sense. Are there any strategies you would use? Which ones are important for you to help understand this text? It's a pretty straightforward piece, but there are some different strategies that you can use to help personalize this, internalize this, and get to a deeper meaning. And I know as I read this, and I guess doing this over the phone or on a webinar is really sort of funny, but you know, there's a word here, lassitude. And, is that a word that you need to clarify? Some of you may know the meaning. There's no reason to clarify it. For those of you who don't know the meaning, you may want to have it clarified if it interferes with your understanding of the text. When you get to the next paragraph, Amy, the daughter, started every sentence with me. She's there with her fiancé. We think this and we think that. Now, how many of you have planned a wedding with your child, with a sibling, with your daughter or son for that matter, and you hear that we all the time, and sometimes you are just stunned by what some of the ideas are? Well, you can certainly make a connection to Morgan, who is feeling those very same feelings that you are. If you haven't planned a wedding before, you may not be able to connect in the same way. So we need to realize that strategies are very personal, they're very intentional, and much of it depends on the background each and every one of us brings to a text as a reader. Now, the next question is, how does this connect to the Common Core standards? This is the standard for second and third grade. And the standard says for literature to be able to, and I explain, refer, recount, and describe. And by the end of the year, students should be able to read literature, including stories, dramas, and poetry, at the high end of complexity, and be able to do that independently and proficiently. That's the strategy. I mean, that's the standard. And in addition to that, there are substandards, and it talks about structure, and it talks about author purpose, it talks about the type of text. Those are the kinds of things that we expect our students to be able to do with Common Core. Similarly, with informational text, we want them to be able to ask and answer questions, determine, describe, distinguish, refer, recount, compare and contrast. I've taken all of those words right from the Common Core for informational text, and they need to be able to do that in history, social studies, science, and technical text at the end of second and third grade, again, with increasingly complex text, and they need to be able to do it independently and proficiently. I think those are wonderful standards to have. I think we should all expect our students to be able to do that. But my question to you is, how can students do that if they cannot read the text? If they cannot use strategies to help them make sense of text? If they don't know when to stop and to clarify as they are reading? This is another one of those cartoons I love. I can't explain what I just read because I wasn't listening. Many, many of our students can engage in conversations about text in the classroom because they have heard others read it. My concern as an educator is every student needs to be able to read the text him or herself in order to get at the deeper meaning. And in order to do that, we have to teach our students, and I'm underscoring teach our students, how to use strategies, how to make sense out of text. That thinking outside of the box? Well, we need to shift. We need to think outside the box and shift from asking questions to modeling strategies. And we need to start generating a public sharing of those cognitive secrets. We need to do those think alouds, and then we need to have our students do the thinking aloud. All of these strategies, whether you're talking about summarizing, whether you're talking about predicting, whether you're talking about making connections, visualizing, it doesn't matter. All of them include using background knowledge, using specific information, clues from the text, making inferences. This is higher order thinking. We need to create in our classrooms that environment in which students are free to say, I don't get it. So the teacher can go back and scaffold and model the thinking aloud. So others, because let me tell you, if there's one student in the classroom who doesn't get it, there are loads of students in the classroom who don't get it. And students themselves can start thinking aloud and sharing with each other. They can truly start collaborating and working collaboratively to share their learning. And then ultimately, we absolutely have to turn the responsibility over to our students. And so we need to use multiple strategies when reading. We need to teach the students that there's more than one strategy, and one strategy may fit one reader and another. We need to model and explain. We need to scaffold. We need to provide throughout the day plenty of practice and that encouragement of the generalization of strategies to all kinds of reading materials. We need to emphasize the reflective process that's going on here, that we think about the problems we have and we solve them. And then we need to encourage that broad use of strategies in all reading. And I'm going to leave you with two thoughts. This is from a little first grader that I love. I keep trying to swim in the 10th feet, but I can't because I'll drown. And that's why I need a donut. Our modeling, our direct explanation, and our modeling and our scaffolding, those are the donuts that will help our students become independent readers. And then my favorite, sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? And then a voice says to me, this is going to take more than one night. And we as educators need to realize that students are going to move at their own pace, but if we expect it, we can have all of our students become independent users of strategies, understanders of text. It will take time, but it will be worth it for all of our students. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks, Marsha. So checking for questions here. If anybody has any questions, please go ahead and enter those in right now. We're just looking for questions here.
I apologize for the coughing. I don't know what brought that on all of a sudden.
So can you hear me okay, Marsha?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay, good. So we have a couple questions coming in. First one is, what makes open core reading strategy for teaching comprehension unique and effective?
Well, I think the most important, the strategies I will tell you up front aren't unique because those are part of the research, a body of research that is consistent and have been used in a number of programs. I think what truly makes it unique is the way we teach them, that it is not that series of question after question after question, but it is explaining to students what the strategy is, sharing that thinking aloud, and how you arrived at the solution to the problem or making the prediction or summary or whatever, and then gradually turning that responsibility through prompts over to the students.
Great, thank you. So we've got another one here. Along with comprehension skills, how important is it for students to learn the comprehension skills along with early foundational skills?
Well, I think those comprehension skills